20 years. That's how long Dr. Michael Harrison had carried the weight of unanswered questions in his chest, like a stone that grew heavier with each passing day. As the head of forensic pathology at St. Mary's Medical Center, he had seen thousands of cases, solved countless mysteries. But there was one file that remained open on his desk, one face that haunted his dreams. Sarah Michelle Cooper, age 23, disappeared without a trace on a rainy October night in 2004. The morning everything changed started like any other. Michael arrived at his laboratory at 6 a.m., coffee in hand, ready to tackle another day of routine blood work and tissue analysis. But as he sorted through the overnight deliveries, one particular package caught his attention. It was marked urgent cold case evidence and bore the seal of the county sheriff's department. Inside, he found a single vial of blood, carefully preserved, along with a note that made his hands tremble. Dr. Harrison, construction workers, discovered this evidence buried beneath the old Riverside Mall foundation. We believe it may be connected to the Sarah Cooper case. Please expedite analysis. Detective Maria Rodriguez, Sarah Cooper. The name hit him like a physical blow. Michael sank into his chair, memories flooding back with devastating clarity. Sarah hadn't just been another missing person case to him. She had been his daughter's best friend, practically a second daughter to him and his wife, Ellen. Sarah had spent countless weekends at their house, sharing meals, studying for exams, laughing until midnight with Jessica, his daughter. The night Sarah disappeared, she had been walking home from her job at the campus bookstore. Security cameras showed her leaving the building at 9:47 p.m., but after that, nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, no trace. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation had consumed the town for months. Search parties combed every inch of the surrounding forest. Divers searched the nearby lake, and volunteers distributed missing person flyers throughout 3 counties. Michael had personally funded several private investigators desperate for any lead, any closure. But as weeks turned to months and months turned to years, hope gradually faded. Sarah Cooper became another statistic, another face on a cold case board. Now, 20 years later, Michael held what might be the key to finally understanding what had happened that night. His hands shook as he prepared the blood sample for analysis. The preservation was remarkably good, considering its age. Whoever had stored this evidence had done so with meticulous care. As the machines hummed to life, beginning their complex process of DNA extraction and analysis, Michael's mind drifted back to that terrible period. He remembered Jessica's breakdown when they finally accepted that Sarah might never come home. His daughter had struggled with survivor's guilt, questioning why she hadn't walked with Sarah that night, why she hadn't insisted on giving her a ride. The family dynamics had shifted permanently after Sarah's disappearance. Ellen became overprotective, barely letting Jessica out of her sight. Their marriage strained under the weight of grief and helplessness. Jessica eventually left for college across the country, needing distance from the painful memories. She now lived in Seattle with her own family, rarely visiting home because everything here reminded her of her lost friend. Hours passed as Michael waited for the results. He tried to focus on other cases, but his concentration was shattered. Every few minutes, he found himself staring at the machines, willing them to work faster. Finally, at 3:17 p.m., the computer chimed with the completion of the analysis. What he saw on the screen made his blood run cold. The DNA profile was a perfect match to the samples they had collected from Sarah's personal belongings 20 years ago. This was definitely her blood, but there was something else, something that changed everything. The blood work revealed something impossible, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about Sarah's disappearance. Mixed with Sarah's DNA was another genetic profile, one that showed a familial relationship, not a parent or sibling, but something else, a child. Sarah had been pregnant when she disappeared. Michael's hands trembled as he ran the additional tests, confirming what seemed impossible. The blood sample contained fetal DNA, indicating Sarah had been approximately 12 weeks pregnant at the time of her disappearance. This changed everything about the case. It wasn't just about a missing young woman anymore. There had been 2 victims, but the analysis revealed something even more shocking. Using advanced techniques that hadn't existed 20 years ago, Michael was able to extract and analyze the paternal DNA from the fetal cells. His fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, entering the genetic markers into the National DNA Database. The computer search took 17 minutes, 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours. When the results appeared on screen, Michael felt the world tilt beneath his feet. There was a match in the database. The father of Sarah's unborn child was someone whose DNA was on file due to a recent arrest. David Thompson, age 42, currently serving time for financial fraud at the state penitentiary. Michael knew that name. David Thompson had been Sarah's supervisor at the campus bookstore. During the original investigation, he had been questioned extensively, but never considered a serious suspect. He had a solid alibi for the night of Sarah's disappearance. He was married with 2 young children, and he seemed genuinely devastated. By her disappearance, the investigators had quickly moved on to other leads. With shaking fingers, Michael called Detective Rodriguez. The phone rang 3 times before she answered, her voice tired and worn. "Rodriguez here. Maria, it's Michael Harrison. You need to sit down for this." "What did you find?" "Doc, Sarah Cooper was pregnant. 12 weeks, and I know who the father was." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Maria finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Are you certain?" "DNA doesn't lie, Maria. David Thompson, Sarah was carrying his child." The implications hit them both simultaneously. David Thompson's alibi hadn't been for the night Sarah disappeared. It had been for the night she was supposedly killed. What if she had been pregnant with his child? If she had threatened to expose their relationship? If she had demanded he leave his wife? The timeline of the case suddenly took on an entirely different shape. "Michael, I need you to run those tests again. Double-check everything if this is true. If David Thompson is connected to Sarah's disappearance, we're looking at reopening a 20-year-old murder case." Over the next several hours, Michael ran every test he could think of. He verified the DNA profiles, confirmed the pregnancy markers, and even brought in a colleague to independently verify his results. Everything checked out. Sarah Cooper had been pregnant with David Thompson's child when she disappeared. As news of the discovery spread through the medical center, Michael found himself remembering details about David Thompson that had seemed insignificant at the time. The man had been nervous during his interviews, but everyone had attributed that to the stress of having a coworker go missing. He had volunteered for search parties, but many people had done that. He had seemed genuinely concerned, but sociopaths were often excellent actors. That evening, Michael drove home to his empty house and sat in his study, staring at a photograph of Sarah and Jessica from their high school graduation. Both girls were beaming, arms around each other, full of hope and dreams for the future. Only one of them had gotten to live those dreams. He picked up the phone and dialed Jessica's number in Seattle. She answered on the 3rd ring, and he could hear his grandchildren playing in the background. "Dad, is everything okay? You never call this late." "Jessica, honey, I need to tell you something about Sarah." The silence that followed was heavy, with 20 years of unspoken grief. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice was small, like the frightened girl she had been when her best friend disappeared. "Did you find her, Dad? Did you finally find her?" "We found evidence, sweetheart. We found answers. Sarah was pregnant when she disappeared, and we know who the father was." Jessica's sob echoed through the phone line, a sound of grief so pure and raw that it nearly broke Michael's heart all over again. "She never told me," Jessica whispered. "We told each other everything, but she never said anything about being pregnant. She must have been so scared, so alone." Over the next hour, Michael told Jessica everything he had discovered. They talked about Sarah's relationship with David Thompson, about the implications of the pregnancy, about what this meant for the investigation. For the first time in 20 years, they had hoped that there might finally be justice for their beloved Sarah. The following morning brought a flurry of activity. Detective Rodriguez arrived at the medical center with a team of investigators, and they began the process of formally reopening Sarah Cooper's case. David Thompson would be brought in for questioning. His alibi from 20 years ago would be re-examined, and search warrants would be issued for any property he had access to during that time period. Michael spent the morning briefing the investigative team on his findings, walking them through the DNA analysis, explaining the significance of each piece of evidence. As he spoke, he could see the determination growing in their eyes. They had a real lead now, a direction to pursue. But as the investigators prepared to leave for the prison to question David Thompson, Michael felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in finally having answers, but there was also a deep sadness. Sarah Cooper had been carrying a child, and that child had died with her. The lives had been lost, and a young woman had faced her final moments alone and afraid. Detective Rodriguez called that evening with an update. David Thompson had initially denied any relationship with Sarah Cooper, but when confronted with the DNA evidence, he had broken down completely. Through tears, he had confessed to having an affair with Sarah, but he vehemently denied killing her. He claimed she was going to expose their relationship. Rodriguez reported, says she wanted him to leave his wife and marry her. He admits they fought about it several times in the weeks before she disappeared, but he swears he didn't hurt her. Do you believe him? Michael asked. I don't know yet. He's agreed to take a polygraph, and we're getting a warrant to search his property. From 20 years ago, he sold the house 15 years ago, but the new owners have agreed to let us examine the grounds. 3 days later, the ground-penetrating radar found what they were looking for. Buried beneath what had once been David Thompson's backyard garden, investigators discovered human remains. After 20 years of questions, Sarah Michelle Cooper was finally coming home. The forensic analysis confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. The remains were Sarah's, and the evidence painted a clear picture of what had happened that night 20 years ago. Sarah had confronted David about their relationship and her pregnancy. In a moment of panic and rage, he had killed her to protect his marriage and reputation. David Thompson eventually confessed to the full crime. He had lured Sarah to his house under the pretense of discussing their situation, but when she refused to quietly disappear and threatened to tell his wife about the affair and the pregnancy, he had struck her with a garden spade. In his panic, he had buried her in his backyard, then spent the next 2 decades living with the secret of what he had done. The trial made national headlines. Bookstore supervisor guilty of murder after 20 years. Read the newspaper headlines. David Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice had finally been served, but it felt hollow after such a long wait. At Sarah's funeral, finally held 20 years after her disappearance, Michael stood with Jessica and Ellen, watching as hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Sarah's parents, who had died within 5 years of each other during the long years of not knowing, weren't there to see their daughter finally laid to rest. But the community that had never forgotten her was there in force. Jessica delivered a eulogy that brought tears to every eye in the church. She spoke about Sarah's dreams of becoming a teacher, her infectious laugh, her kindness to everyone she met. She talked about the child Sarah had been carrying, the grandchild Sarah's parents would never meet, the life that had been cut short by one man's selfish act. Sarah would have been an amazing mother, Jessica said, her voice breaking. She had so much love to give, so many dreams yet to fulfill. The man who took her from us didn't just steal her life, he stole the future she was creating, the child she was carrying, the family she would have built. After the service, Michael found himself standing alone at Sarah's graveside, thinking about the random chance that had led to this moment of closure. If construction workers hadn't discovered that evidence, if the blood hadn't been so well preserved, if DNA technology hadn't advanced to the point where they could extract fetal DNA from 20-year-old samples, Sarah's case might have remained unsolved forever. But sometimes, Michael reflected, justice finds a way. Sometimes the truth refuses to stay buried. No matter how deep someone tries to bury it, sometimes love transcends death, reaching across the decades to finally bring a lost daughter home. As he walked away from the cemetery, Michael felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for 20 years. Sarah Cooper was finally at rest, and her killer would spend the remainder of his life paying for what he had done. It wasn't the ending anyone would have chosen, but it was an ending nonetheless. After 2 decades of questions, there were finally answers. The blood test results had surfaced 20 years after her disappearance, and with them had come the truth that Sarah's family had been searching for. Science, technology, and the relentless pursuit of justice had combined to ensure that Sarah Michelle Cooper would not be forgotten, that her story would finally be told, and that the man who had taken everything from her would face the consequences of his actions. Sometimes justice is swift, sometimes it takes 20 years, but eventually, the truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's been buried.